absolutely a pleasure for me to be here. The reality is, as you all know, alienation is way more common a phenomenon than one would think. So, for instance, within my family, my larger extended family, we have one case of parental alienation, and the grandmother and grandfather also are alienated. We also have two cases of what I call adult sibling alienation. That is particularly around inheritance issues and when an elderly parent is getting close to dying or needs a lot of care, one sibling or sibling-in-law begins attacking another adult sibling. That's a phenomenon I've written about also on Psychology Today. It's the same phenomenon as alienation, only different players. So besides this issue hitting me personally, particularly since I began writing about it, I've had many, many referrals, mainly from the alienated parent who are looking desperately for help. What I've seen is obviously anxiety, depression, anger, hopelessness, the works. All of those are signs that there's a problem, a conflict. Now, I use those words almost simultaneously, almost equivalently, and I'll explain that more later. The fact is that the main conflict is for the alienated parent is I want my sons and my daughters back, and they're being blocked from me. Or I want the positive relationship we used to have back, and that's being blocked. So I'm sure most of you out there who are alienated have tried all you can think of to reestablish conflict, a relationship in a cooperative way, and you wouldn't be here now if those techniques had worked. So the technique of collaborative conflict resolution that we're talking about today, I'm not advocating for you to sit down and try to utilize necessarily with the ex-spouse that's been alienating your children. Not everybody can participate in collaborative conflict resolution. At the same time, many of the people that you do need to deal with, your lawyers, medical professionals, therapists, friends, other family members, hopefully these techniques will be useful for using with them. In fact, there's 3 realms where you can use techniques of collaborative problem solving or conflict resolution. I'm using those words almost interchangeably. Realm number 1 is for conflicts within yourself. That is, I want to do X, and on the other hand, I'm afraid to do X, or I feel like I shouldn't do X, or whatever. Anytime you're torn, that's an inner conflict. Realm number 2, and the easiest to identify, is when you want X and someone else wants Y. Or you want to do X, and they say, no, I don't want to do X. So that's interpersonal conflict resolution. The third realm is sometimes there's a conflict between you and reality. For instance, I want to keep fighting for my child on the one hand, and on the other hand, I'm out of money, I'm out of energy, I just can't do this anymore. That's a conflict between you and reality. It's also an inner conflict. It's a conflict between you and reality if the time, the energy, the money in particular is no longer there to keep fighting, at least in the courts. That's a reality conflict between you and finances. Okay, so that's the 3 realms where these techniques may be useful. I'm going to try to give examples in all 3 if we have time. And excuse me if I look aside here. I have notes on the 3 questions that Elaine and I agreed that I would address, the 6 questions rather, that she and I agreed that we would address today. The first was for examples of situations where conflict resolution skills, win-win conflict resolution, can be helpful. So let's take the first realm we talked about, in intrapsychic conflicts. Here's a few short examples. I have older adult children. Should I talk with them about what I'm going through with their little sister? And part of me says yes, part of me says no. Or do I listen to the part of me that wants to talk about this alienation problem all the time with my friends, with my new partner? Many people find a new significant other. Do I talk all the time with them because it's on my mind? Or what else? What can I do about that part of me that just wants to talk about it all the time? So already you probably can hear that it's a conflict and the X is against Y, and it's also just a problem to solve. So these are basically problem-solving techniques. Interpersonal conflicts, common with a lawyer. That's the main conflict I'm going to go into detail with today. The lawyer says you should take this pathway. This is how I want to argue the case. You say, that doesn't sound good to me. That's not where I want to go. Another kind of conflict, maybe you used to be good friends with your sister-in-law or your brother-in-law, and you want to be able to talk with them about what's going on. The trouble is, they believe you're X, and you obviously have a very different perspective. These techniques can be useful for reconnecting with them. Family doctor who has not been sending you reports of what's going on with your child, even though the court documents say you're supposed to be informed of everything. So if you can use these techniques when you go to talk with health professionals, hopefully your odds of a good outcome go up. Okay, and I mentioned already between yourself and reality factors. I've found that money is the biggest issue, the biggest problem. I want to do more to get my child back, and I'm totally out of money. So at least in terms of pursuing a court case, it's just not realistic. What'll I do? What would be a win-win solution to that dilemma? Okay, question number 2. Those were just examples, and I'm sure each of you can think of situations where you're at odds with someone in your life that maybe around the alienation issue. If you use these techniques, you'll have some better results. So what are the 3 steps of conflict resolution? Here's a map. I drew you a map. I'm hoping you can see it. Elaine, I can't see the picture of me on the screen. Is the picture of me on the screen there? Are you there, Elaine?
Yeah.
Yes, you are. Okay. I want to make sure this is visible. I see it now. Okay. Now, what does this look like to you as you're looking at it? Hopefully, it looks kind of like a face. 2 eyes, big long nose, and a wide mouth. Okay, the eyes are step 1 of conflict resolution. They represent 2 ideas of what to do that are in opposition. The nose is where the underlying concerns are going to go. One list, whereas there were 2 initial positions, 2 initial opposing ideas. The key to conflict resolution, step 2, is to drop down and explore the underlying concerns, the wishes, the desires, the fears. What's of concern to me? These are positive concerns and negative concerns. Some people would call them pros and cons. All the pros, all the cons, all his views, all her views, all the lawyer's views, all your views, whatever the issue, both sides' concerns go on one list. Now, when I'm in an important conflict, I make that a bulleted list. I'll show you right now. So really, it looks like this. Can you see the bullet points? Each bullet point is either one of my concerns, or let's say it's an interpersonal conflict, one of his concerns or her concerns, all on one list. That's the key piece. So too often, when we're in an adversarial kind of conflict, it's me against you. That's only going to be settled. Just a minute, I'm in the speech. I'll talk with you later. Bye-bye. Grandsons. Okay. I'm broadcasting from home. So where was I? Underlying concerns. Interesting. Okay, I'll go back to my chart. When you have all the underlying concerns on, we're talking about adversarial. If I'm just arguing for why I want my proposed plan of action, and you're arguing for why you want your plan of action, that's two separate lists. Similarly, if I'm trying to make an inner decision, if I'm listing pros versus cons, that's two separate lists. That sets up for an adversarial tug of war, or against each other, pulling this way or getting into a battle. This drop from arguing about the initial positions or the initial preferences to what are the concerns to which each preference is a potential solution. That's the key to keeping the discussion collaborative and to coming out with a win-win solution. So what do we mean by win-win solution? Once the concerns are all listed, bullet points in one list, I can't say that enough times, all on one list, then you'll feel ready to come out with a new solution, a solution responsive to every single one of the concerns on the list, each of the bullet points. Now, that may sound impossible. It actually works quite well. Often, if there's a number of bullet points, lots of concerns, it helps to have a question specifically of all those concerns. What's the single one or two most important concerns to me or to each of us? Then you start building a solution set. You don't just pick this way or that way anymore. Now you're looking for a more complex plan of action that includes the elements, pieces, specific things you'll do, responsive to each of the concerns you've listed. Now that probably sounds a little bit abstract. Let's give a specific example. I'm going to start with an example from just ordinary life, daily life. It's a simple, trivial example. Let's say there's two people living together, and for purposes now, let's make it a couple. It just makes it easier. Let's say that you've been working and you come home and you were planning to make dinner, but you open the refrigerator door, there's nothing there, you're exhausted. You decide, oh, I want to go out. Your partner comes home, you say, let's go out for dinner. And your partner says, oh, no way, it is so cold outside. I don't want to go out at all. You've got a conflict. Okay, I want to go out for dinner. I don't want to go out for dinner. Instead of a tug of war, you drop down to exploring underlying concerns. What might be their underlying concerns? We already mentioned she's tired or he's tired. There's nothing in the refrigerator. Being tired may be a reason why you want to go out instead of cooking dinner. Being tired may be a reason why one of you doesn't want to go out. Another thing may be, geez, we've been eating almost the same thing every night. I'm up for something different. Or one of you might, the one that wants to go out, might say, I heard about this great restaurant and there's no work I have to do after dinner. I would love to go out with you and we could try this new restaurant. Once you've listed all the underlying concerns, then it's time to switch to creating a solution. Now, when you're creating a solution, you need to speak about what you can do, and the other person speaks about what they could offer to the solution. Now, obviously, if it's intrapsychic, it's all you, but this is for interpersonal, it's still the same basic 3 steps. Express your initial positions, and at that point in step 1, you realize, oh, this is a conflict, or you could say, this is a problem. That means we need to turn on the win-win waltz and go to step 2, which is exploring underlying concerns. And then you come out with the solution. In any case, where were we? We're at what might be a solution for this couple. So he says, I know there's nothing really in the refrigerator. I looked there too. And again, it's just so cold out there. The idea of going out is terrible for me. How about if I just pick up the phone and call a restaurant and have them deliver us some kind of takeout food? She at that point might say, that sounds great. I'm too tired even to call to order, but I did want to go to that restaurant. So then maybe one of them says, so how about if the plan includes over the weekend, let's plan to go to that restaurant. Now they've covered all the underlying concerns. They have a solution set that works for both of them. And hallelujah, it's been the win-win waltz. Now, why do I call it the win-win waltz? 3 steps. It's a partly good name. I like the connotation that it's easy and it flows. At the same time, a waltz goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The win-win waltz often goes 1, 2, 3, 2, where you remember additional concerns, and then 3. Oh, so let's fix up that solution set with an additional piece of the plan of action so it meets that additional concern. Okay. Let's see how that applies to an actual alienation situation. I wish at this point we could pause and I could say, are there any questions so far? Okay, that's not an option. But that's kind of an internal conflict resolution for me. I wish it's not an option. So what'll I do? I think what I'll do is just move forward with an alienation example. Okay, I have an outline here, and I do want to make sure that I'm covering in the order we said we would. One other point before I give an alienation example. If you've read the book Getting to Yes, some of this might sound quite familiar. Or if you work in a setting where there's collaborative conflict resolution in the court system, for instance, or even mediation, you might have heard of the book Getting to Yes. That book, which came out in the late 80s, early 90s, was the first to present the idea that conflicts could be resolved in a win-win way, following this kind of a 3-step forward. The difficulty with that book was that it was written for business and legal situations. So the language didn't apply to personal situations. The language was, you start with its initial positions and go into positional bargaining. That's the fighting or the bargaining over your initial ideas. And that you then have to switch to look for the interests that lie behind those positions. And then that became called interest-based bargaining. Well, the trouble is people in their daily lives, I mean, we don't talk about, so what's your position? What's my position? What are the interests that lie behind? We talk about plans of action or preferences in step one, recommendations, what would you like to do? Step two, the word concern seemed to me to fit better. And I thought a lot about this when I was writing a book for therapists of From Conflict to Resolution. And that's where this language of initial ideas and then underlying concerns became part of my vocabulary, and I hope it extends to other people's vocabulary for doing win-win problem solving. And then the third step is a plan of action. Okay, now we're on to step two. Step two is a practical example that came up in the case of one of someone that I know who recently had a court case. There was a conflict there between the lawyer and the man with the court case. The man said, I haven't seen my son for far too long. It's been 3 months, 4 months, 6 months already that the court, for one reason or another, has approved his mother's motions to keep him away from me. I'm desperate to see him. The lawyer said, well, the best way to go about winning this case is this time when we go to court, what I want to do is ask for the court to give permission or whatever the wording is, to get a thorough assessment of the family. And then in another 3 months or so, we can have the next court hearing and we'll be on a solid foundation, because I know a very good PRI or whatever who does understand alienation. And if he or she writes that case up and really interviews your ex and your son and you, I think we have a slam dunk at that point. The father said, I just can't tolerate that. Another 3 months, in addition, from what I now we're getting to the underlying concerns. So the lawyer's concerns would be able to win the case and to have a strategy that he was quite confident in. The next bullet point, though, is the man's concern, and it was, I'm desperate to see my son, number one. Next concern, I've read that the longer that alienation, severe alienation like this has become, the longer that blockage between parent and child goes on, the harder it is to break the mindset of alienation in the heart of the child. And that just makes me frantic. And the dad said one other thing, besides, it's not like I have unlimited money. I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel by paying you for this case. I can't pay you. I can't for yet another case. I can't pay you for several $1,000s for another assessment. It's just not an option for me. Okay, we've got all the concerns for both sides listed in one list. Now, the lawyer and the man together, the dad together, have to get creative. Okay, what are we going to do? The lawyer needs to look at what he can offer towards solution. The dad needs to look at what he can offer towards solution. In this case, the lawyer said, you know, I've read, and I think this is Linda Gottlieb gets credit for this idea. I've read that there's a strategy that if you get in somebody who's knowledgeable into the court about alienation and have them explain to the judge what it is and how it works, then even though there hasn't been a thorough evaluation of you, of your ex, of the child, I can then ask questions of the expert. If parent A did this, would that be alienation? Or if the child is showing that, would that be alienation? They ended up using that strategy because that was a, let's do it now, let's aim to ask the court, not just for an assessment and another hearing, but right now to return my son to me. Okay, that's an example of how this particular dad used the win-win waltz to work with his lawyer in a collaborative way and come up with a solution that met the concerns on both sides. Okay, let me look at how we're doing on time. Okay. Let me go through the rest of the questions, and then of the 6 questions that Elaine and I decided I would address. If there's time, we can go back and do another walkthrough of a win-win waltz situation. You know, as I'm looking at this, I'm realizing there's one more piece to building solutions that can make a huge difference. At the end, when you come up with a win-win plan of action, win-win meaning it meets all the criteria for both of us, it's important to ask the question, are there any little pieces of this that still feel unfinished? It seems to me, if I remember this case correctly, that they realized, oh no, the lawyer said, I think that the particular expert in alienation that I wanted to invite, I think that he is on vacation for a while. Let me give him a call and find out when he's going to be back. The lawyer made the call, thank heavens, that expert was going to be back starting a week before the court date, and they were fine. That's an example, though, of often that last question being so important. I'll say the question again. Are there any little pieces of this that still feel unfinished? Okay. So we've talked so far about where you find conflicts. What are some examples of situations that you're likely to run into conflicts or problems? Again, we can call it either word. In alienation cases, we've covered the 3 basic steps of alienation. Let's look next at what is the same and what's different about conflict resolution on the one hand and problem solving. They're both forms of problem solving. The main difference is we use the word conflict if 2 people or within yourself have been adversarial and it feels in some way like a fight. We tend to use the word problem solving once everybody's calmed down, or if there was no anger to begin with. Sometimes at step 1, there's no anger because if we go back to the simple, well, let's go back to the lawyer. There was no animosity. There was no insistence between the lawyer and the dad about my way, no, my way, no, my way. That's a conflict. Instead, they said an umbrella statement for what the dilemma was. Oh, I guess we have to figure out together what's going to be the goal of how we're going to structure your testimony and what I'm asking the court to do, I being the lawyer. We need to figure out what's our goal for this particular court case. That's the overview or umbrella question. When you frame it in the umbrella question, oh, it's a problem to solve. You still go through listing the underlying concerns and coming up with a win-win solution. And what you don't have that would cause us to call it conflict resolution is the negative energy, the tension. Now, this may be a good place to pause and say, what if there is tension? And what if people don't know this? Don't know how to switch levels and look for underlying concerns and then find a win-win solution. Then what you get is a conflict that solves by who has more power. How do you look powerful? Often by using anger. So that's why once there's anger, the conflict is all the more likely to be resolved by who's stronger, who is more conflict or fight avoidance. And what you'll come out with is a win-lose situation. One person wins, the other person loses. Now, sometimes what you get is just tension, not outright anger, just tension. We don't really want to talk about it because we know we're on different sides of this issue. What you get then is ongoing anxiety. Sometimes, so that there's no higher and higher escalation of anger, one person gives up. What do you see then that still tells you there's a conflict there? Depression. Giving up or folding is a formula for heading down depression road. Okay, anger, depression, anxiety. There's actually one other route that's the antithesis of collaborative problem solving. And that's to say, I give up, I don't want to look at it, I'm going to just go have a beer. The addictions and also obsessive compulsive behaviors are an attempt to flee the conflict altogether. So that's a recipe for a losing outcome, as opposed to a win-lose, dominant, submissive, or what we're working toward is a win-win outcome. Okay, so all of that clarifies the difference between conflict resolution, because conflict can be resolved by one person giving up with a winner-loser, or by not addressing it, and problem solving. Problem solving, again, I cannot emphasize strongly enough, only takes place in a calm, collaborative, friendly interchange. Okay, so that brings up the whole question of anger. Why is anger so problematic in trying to make a collaborative solution? Because as soon as anger comes up, game's over. The odds of your making it to win-win are very low. It puts a stick in the wheel of forward momentum. So why is anger so problematic? People shift when they're anger into who's right, who's wrong. People shift when they're angry from listening in order to uptake and understand the concerns of both people to just arguing for your side. Uptake, real listening, taking in new information, happens less and less the more the emotional level is intense. So it's very problematic. In addition, as soon as you're angry, what's going to happen to the other person? Are they going to get more generous and more happy? They may cave in. The odds that they are going to want to be able to think flexibly and be generous with what they can offer in the solution, those odds zoom down. It's not going to happen. So in order to accomplish this, One has to be very clear that if I want to stay in problem-solving mode, I have to get rid of the anger. Absolutely no anger in this. Does that sound like a tall order? It's an essential order. Okay. So our fourth question is, what are the most important communication skills for collaborative conflict resolution? Well, the fact is, collaborative conflict resolution requires a vehicle for doing the talking. Just like if you want to get from Denver to New York by car or by plane or by somewhere, you need some vehicle to get you there. The vehicle that helps you traverse this map is talking and listening. So you need the talking skills. And I'm not talking about just finding words, being able to articulate. That's a big help. There's other talking skills that are essential. The basic rule is you have to be able to talk about yourself and ask about the other, keeping firm boundaries around what's me and what's them. So for instance, to say, well, look, you should be doing this. Violation, that's talking about the other. I would like to. Oh, that's talking about me. How about this? Am I talking about me or crossing the boundary and talking about the other? You always seem to, obviously it's talking about the other. In fact, almost any you statement, psychologists talk about I statements and you statements, almost any you statement is crossing that boundary and violating the rule of I can talk about myself or I can ask about the other. So I may be tempted to say, well, you have a wrong idea about this. You think that, Instead, I need to ask the other, what do you think about? Or how do you feel about? So in talking about yourself, you mostly need to start with I or my. I would like to, my concern is, and then you elaborate from there. To ask good questions, the sentence starter also is vitally important. Journalists are taught to use open-ended question words, specifically what and how, with occasional when or who. What and how invite a free flow of information. That's as opposed to are you, did you, have you. Those are the three that come to mind for me now. Those are yes, no question starters. So it's not for you to ask the lawyer, let's say, are you thinking that blah, 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 blah? Instead, you ask, well, what do you think about da, 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 da? What do you think about how effective the expert on alienation is going to be in explaining it to the judge? What do you think about how open the judge is likely to be? Those are what or how questions. How will you find out if that expert is going to be available? So you can talk about yourself or you can ask about the other. And good questions begin with what and how. What or how? Not are you, did you, have you, da, 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 da. Okay, so the basic rule of talking is you talk about yourself and you ask about the other. There's a second basic rule, zero toxicity. Now, if you're just talking about yourself, you're less at risk for this. At the same time, it's important to say blame, criticism, anything attacking, a negative tone of voice, sarcasm. Those all insert toxicity into the dialogue. And again, like anger, stick in the wheel of progress. everything comes to a halt. So keeping your tone of voice calm and cooperative, and your words calm and cooperative and about yourself, my concern is memorize those 2 sentence starters. They're very useful. My concern is, or just discuss in details of whatever the topic is. No use. Okay, that's the talking skills. What about listening skills? So it turns out everybody has a good ear and a bad ear. The good ear listens to uptake, to understand, listens for what's right in what the other person says. The bad ear listens for what's wrong with it. Now, there's a place for adding what your concerns are with what's wrong. Initially, though, you need to listen for what's right. So, for instance, when the dad hears the lawyer say, we need to postpone asking for a particular ruling to get your son back in your house, we just need to ask for a total assessment and another hearing. His first response would have been, you crazy? Not going to be very helpful. If he stays calm and listens with the good ear, he might be able to use an yes and response. Yes, I can see that getting a full evaluation would enable it to become clear all the lies my ex has spoken, and hopefully would make clear the enmeshment in her relationship with my son, and would also explain why my son protests so loudly when he has to come see me, because she's made him into her counselor, and it's like he's the dad or the parent for her, and she's terrified of her parent leaving. Hopefully, this is all elaborating the yes part of your response. Then you add either and or and at the same time. And at the same time, as good as that solution might sound, I have these other concerns. And then the dad adds the money, too long away from his son, all the other concerns on the list. Okay, so those are dialogue skills for how you get the concerns out onto the list in a way that keeps the dialogue feeling cooperative. Now, I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. The tone must stay friendly. As soon as there's any irritability, frustration, those are the beginnings of the anger mode. Catch yourself, because emotional self-regulation is the essential piece of all of this working. You have to be able to stay in the calm zone. So that's the talking skills, the listening skills, emotional self-regulation. And there's one other skill that is important to be aware of, and that's dialogue patterning skills. When you're trying to resolve a conflict with somebody, you need to speak in short chunks. Make just one point at a time. The opposite of what I'm doing giving a talk. Giving a talk, I'm giving you 45 minutes, 60 minutes of points. If you're trying to have a dialogue with someone, you make one point, let them pick up on that, digest it, and then add the next point. This is what I call additive or even braided dialogue. That yields progress along the pathway from initial differing ideas through concerns to a solution set that will work. As soon as the dialogue has long monologues, people get lost, data gets lost. Don't go there. One point at a time. Just like if you want someone to catch a ball, you throw them one ball. If you throw them 3 balls, 2 of them get lost. Second point about the dialogue pattern, symmetry. Similar number of concerns from both people, similar airtime for both people. Keep it balanced. Okay, that's the basics, a quick course in effective collaborative communication. Let's look at question number 5. How are we doing? Yes, we're doing okay on time. What are the most important, question number 5, what are the most important anger management and impulse control techniques for keeping the conflict resolution process on track? Number 1, recognize when you're beginning to steam. Recognize when your voice is getting louder. Recognize when you feel your chest tighten. Recognize the signs that there's a little bit of anger coming up, and don't let it get to the lot of anger. So how do you prevent that little bit of anger from continuing to grow and grow and grow? Close your eyes right now for just a minute. Picture a stop sign. Notice what color the stop sign is. That should be easy. See it clearly enough that you can count the sides. You saw 6, I assume. I think that's right. Picture the word stop written on the stop sign. Notice even the pole that the stop sign is on. Okay, you can open your eyes again. If that image is very clear now for you, it can be very useful for you. As soon as you feel anger beginning to rise, tone of voice, irritability, frustration, any of those, picture in your mind a stop sign and say to yourself, anger is a stop sign. Now, what do you do at a stop sign? You stop, first of all. What else do? You look, you listen. And then once you understand what's going on, then you proceed forward. You stop, you look both ways at what's going on with you and what the other person is doing. That either of those may be triggering an increase in emotional intensity or irritability. And as at a stop sign, you don't move forward until you can see a safe pathway forward. Once you can, there's a prior question. How do you do that when you're talking with somebody? If it's a simple situation and you caught it early enough, you say to yourself, just a minute, or say to them, I need to think for a minute. Oof, they would love that. Believe me, people would much rather see you stop at the stop sign and think than to have you continue escalating. Now, what if they're beginning to escalate? You can use the same technique. Just a minute, I need to stop and think for just a sec. See my finger? I like that. That stands for the stop sign. Remember the pole? So when I put my finger out, I'm thinking, there's anger either in me or in the other person. Anger is a stop sign. What do I do at a stop sign? I don't pick up this pole and start clobbering the other person with it. I stop, look, and listen. So by calling a pause, that's your first line of options. If that's not enough, you can say, just a minute, I'm desperate for a glass of water, and you leave the room and go get some water. That's a graceful way of taking a break. Excuse me just a minute. And actually, it's good to begin by standing up and start walking. Excuse me, I need to get a glass of water. If you're not, what you're not doing is asking, would you mind if we take a break? This is not a dual decision. You take responsibility for keeping yourself safe from your anger or the other person's anger. So as soon as you see any rise, you picture anger as a stop sign, and you either pause or you do a quick exit. Once you've exited, that gives the other person as well as you a chance to calm down. while you're on the exit, do not bring the other person in the room in your head. He should have, why did he, did it? Do whatever you need to do to distract yourself, drink some water, whatever, calm down, and then begin to think, once you're calmer, how am I going to approach this in a more effective way than using anger? So you'll be able to come up with some answer. Included in that answer will probably, or ideally, be, when I first go back in the room, I'm going to just joke about something and talk about the picture on the wall or the books or just something to make sure that both of us are back in the calm zone. When I'm sure of that, then I'm going to remember those rules about I can talk about myself, or I can ask about what they think or how they're feeling. So I'll either start with something about what my concern is. Remember these skills? I would like to, not I would like you to. I would like to. I'll say that again. Never I would like you to. I would like to. My concern is, or here's another way of looking at this. I've been thinking about this. Or, gee, I agree with you so much. That's a winner. So the other trick for soothing angers is positivity. When you come back in the room, put out some positivity. Gee, by the way, I really like those shoes you're wearing. Where'd you find some, like anything positive, a compliment, appreciation? Gee, I appreciate so much you're letting me get a drink of water. I get really thirsty when I'm talking like this, or for some reason I'm really thirsty, whatever, anything positive, appreciation, affection, understanding, anything that's in a positive tone of voice, and it's going to put positive energy out into the room. Okay, so that's anger management. Exit, calm down, plan your reentry, come back. We're talking a quick exit, probably a couple minutes. And then launch in a positive way and remember what you're trying to accomplish. You're trying to put out your underlying concerns. My concern is, another concern is, and you're trying to listen to their concerns so you can come out with a win-win plan of action. Okay, we have just a few minutes left. What are question number 6, what are the most common mistakes people make with conflict resolution? Mistake number 1, they just don't recognize, oh, this is a conflict, or this is a problem. I need to get out my map that looks like a face and has this da-da-da-da. Number 2 reason why people make mistakes is they're either male or female. So I'll explain that. Men are very good at fixing things. So as soon as they see a conflict, they tend to leap right away to step 3. They don't do enough exploring what the dimensions of the problem are. So if you're male, remind yourself, I've got to fill out all the bullet points. If you're female, the odds are very high, and there's research that I'm saying this, that it's based on, that you'll be quite good at putting your concerns out, at listening to the other person's concerns. What you'll forget to do is to say, okay, so what's our plan of action? What do I want to do about this? What do you want to do about this? Let's map a win-win plan. So that's men blocking this out, and women forgetting to get a solution, a plan of action. That's the main issues that I think people need to work to be very aware of. Identify that, oh, this is a time for the win-win waltz, and make sure that you do all 3 steps with plenty of exploration of the underlying concerns. The more clarification of the underlying concerns, the more likely you'll be able to find a win-win solution. And win-win, remember, means keep adding little pieces to your plan of action until there's a piece responsive for every concern that either you or the other person or the both sides of you have on their minds, your minds, their minds. Okay, I believe that our time is just about up. I do want to thank you again, Elaine, for inviting me. I do hope that this clarification of the 3 steps of conflict resolution and the sub-skills that people need to accomplish them will be helpful for you. I will add one other final thought. This conflict resolution process is essentially the process that therapists need to follow when they're trying to do reunification therapy. They need to let the child who doesn't want to be with or doesn't want to give up their hostile attitude toward a parent, that you have to let them list their concerns, and then the therapist needs to list their concerns, or if the parent's in the room, the parent needs to list their concerns. And it's the therapist's job to make sure both sides are listening to all the concerns, all on one list. Now, in order to do that with the child that says, Daddy's selfish, or Mommy spends too much money, or whatever the child has heard the other parent say, it becomes very important in order to solve this to explain the concept of projection. And then you help the child by asking the child, let's go through your list of the attributes you said about the targeted parent. If you close your eyes, I'll just finish this one session, this one point. Does what you said about the targeted parent apply also to the parent you're living with, that you're mostly with, allied with? And bit by bit, the child needs to see that, oh, maybe it's really projection, what dad says about mom or mom says about dad, of the way they are. And then that loosens the child up to be able to hear the other parent's concern. Because I've seen too much so-called reunification treatment where that process is skipped.